Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strick and Roll. I'm your host Shwin, and this is episode 44. I'm joined by a second-time guest of one of our pods. His name is Yossi Gozlan. He is a contributor on HoopsHype. He runs all the salary cap sheets for them. Yossi, how are you doing today?
Not bad. Just enjoying this mental reset from all of the NBA. It's been nice.
Yeah, it was. Don't get too comfortable. You never know when you get the Woj bomb about Damian Lillard getting traded in some complex 5-team trade.
Yeah, I just wish there was like a rule where free agency had to be announced like just slowly. Like let us react to one thing at a time. Just this like massive bubble bursting, all the news at once. Uh, it's I could only cover so much stuff at once, but it'd be nice if like only now we're learning that the Rockets are signing Jock Landale or something.
No, I think it's definitely a challenge, and I think it's probably. I mean, it's hilarious for me, but I'm sure it sucks for you. Yeah, I always think it's funny because I'm assuming like these contracts drop and then you get 15 questions from people like me that are just like, "Is this fully guaranteed?" And you're like, "I have no fucking idea." And we're gonna talk about how exciting all that stuff is. But before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. The first being that Strickland has an Instagram. Check that out. That is at the strick.land on Instagram. We're posting all kinds of new content on there. The Strickland also has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are and you haven't done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise. You can find that on our website at thestrick.land. We have all kinds of stuff on there: t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, water bottles, even coffee mugs, you name it, we got it. Check it out. Again, that is on our website at thestrick.land. And then finally, the Strickland has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There is a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, the podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to the Strickland Mailbag, hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, aka the Doug Bag, alongside Dallas Amico, that comes out every other week. You also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There is a $9 tier that gets you access to this podcast right here, Strick and Roll Solo Pod, where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits like listening in on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day. Whether you choose to subscribe or not, none of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without Bet Online, whose ad copy I am currently waiting to load. They're great. They're a wonderful sponsor. We love them. Uh, I'm going to totally read exactly what I need to as soon as it opens up. And we are here slowly but surely. BetOnline is your number one source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines and the latest match reports for this year's NBA playoffs. BetOnline is your sports intel headquarters this season. If you have you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs from basketball, MLB, NHL, hockey, golf, UFC, and boxing, the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games, available to play for right from your home. Get into the action today. So head to the website or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your 50% bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, where the game starts. So I wanted to start with like a broad CBA question here, and just your read on this, because there's been a lot of talk about, oh man, this deal, it's going to kill the middle class. It's going to kill the middle class, the NBA. And there was a lot of like that analysis that went out before this free agency. And I think some of the stuff that we saw in the free agency strengthened people's beliefs on that. And I actually don't feel that way. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because the way I interpret this is, yes, the middle class in some ways of the NBA, the non-star class, however you want to put it, got killed in many ways during this free agency. But I also feel like you have to give teams time to unwind their salary cap that they had structured in a specific way, because they were operating in a world where the salary cap was entirely different. There weren't the two aprons. There weren't these restrictions that change your flexibility in terms of how you can make trades and all this type of stuff. And on top of that, every projection I've seen, maybe you can correct me if you've heard anything differently, has the cap jumping year on year almost steadily at 10%. And I know that sounds crazy because it's like, fucking no market goes up 10% every year. But given the TV rights and how important that is and how expensive those will be, I don't think this is an outlandish projection. And when you project it out, I think like, the Jalen Brown's contract went out and everybody got their jokes in, including myself. But like, I think in the final year of that contract, there's a chance the cap is at like 220 million. And so I guess my question is like, do you think that's accurate that like the middle class is just going to be annihilated as we move forward into this new cap? Or do you think like, I mean, is my theory correct that teams maybe just need some time to adjust, and in a couple of years we'll be singing a different tune?
So I think you're 100% right on that exact point that most teams, this was a huge shock to them, or, they've been planning a certain way and now they got to start planning a different way. Teams like the Warriors, Clippers, they can't just do this overnight. Their team's so expensive. They can't just expect them to make these massive changes in one off season to adjust. I think, though, and I've thought about this, I do think, there is a possibility that the middle class could get hurt. And that's mostly, in my opinion, if teams continue to behave with max contracts the way that they've been in the past. That's specifically handing out max contracts to players that aren't the elite top 10, 15 guys. And off the top of my head, I can't really think of who were those guys this offseason. But
I mean, you could argue Jalen Brown would be an example of that.
So I'll get to Jalen in a second, but I think one example, I think a guy that really got hurt, possibly James Harden. I wonder if there was a scenario where if these restrictions didn't come in, maybe the Sixers would have been okay overpaying him, even like a 1 or 2 year max, something like that. But obviously there was no market, so I think no matter what, this was going to happen to Harden. But let's say there was more of a market. I could see if the CBA was still going like it was, I could see him getting overpaid just to close to the max, just to keep him around. I mean, Kyrie got a lot of money. I don't think there really was any team offering him that much. So I guess that's another example right there, though. But yeah, Jalen Brown, he's like a top 20-ish guy. I don't think he should be getting paid the same percentage of the cap relative to Giannis and Jokic and all the other really top elite guys. So, and that's more of I think that's more though of a criticism of the Supermax system. The fact that this was his first All-NBA appearance, and he got it the exact time he needed it to qualify. That's really the only reason he's in this position. But I was wondering, will there be teams trying to negotiate more? Maybe instead of giving him the max 35, maybe they could have given him like 32, 33. I think that would have made a lot more sense. And the only time we've ever seen that, I'm pretty sure, was Rudy Gobert got like 32%.
Yeah, right.
So
it's one of those tough things, right? Because you're like, yeah, like on the dollars and cents, it makes sense to offer him less than 35%. But if you're Jalen Brown and you're his agent, especially, you're like, your guys are over the cap anyway. Like what is the extra 2-3% here that you're saving? What is that really doing for you? And also, it's like, do you really want me to go to my client and be like, look, they're going to give you 5 years, 290, but they can't do 5 years, 304? And it's just one of those weird things where it's like, the numbers, I think I agree with you. I don't think he's worth the 35% max. Hell, I think like you can argue the 30% max is about his max limit, but like you're managing humans also, and it's tough to go to Jalen and his agent and be like, well, you qualified for this 35% max, but actually we don't think you're a top 15 player in the league. And he's going to be like, wait, what the fuck do you mean you don't think I'm a top 15 player in the league? Everybody else does, apparently. So I think that one is tough. And then it's also one where I'm like, this is where I just always am like, I mean, and this has nothing to do with the cap, but you're always just like, maybe was there a chance to trade Jalen? Could you have used Jalen to get something else? And that opens up another can of worms. But I think if you were going to keep him, you had to be willing to give him this max contract.
Yeah, I understand why they gave it to him,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, as time goes on, it's good chance it looks better. That's only going to be the biggest contract in the league until next year when Tatum signs his supermax.
Right.
But again, back to the middle class thing. I think the bigger question is this the end of the Zach LaVines, the Bradley Beals, those type of guys getting no-brainer max deals? I gotta say, I would have to imagine, yeah, because that's even more those ones are definitely way more egregious. Like Jalen, you can in the end, there's definitely you can still justify it. What like I don't agree with it, but at the same time, I'm not saying he completely doesn't deserve it or anything. Like there's a legitimate case to why he deserves it. But then there's like top 40-ish players. Like Domantas Sabonis basically got like a max contract. He got so much money. These are guys that aren't even like they're not all-stars every year. So the question is, will that start to temper? I don't know. Seems like we might start to see some negotiation from teams finally with those types of players. But then, as we saw, like in Sacramento just now, it'll probably still happen. You'll probably still see some guys getting a ton more money, and when those players get like max money or close to it, that's taken away from someone else theoretically. So whoever got squeezed this offseason, and there's like a number of guys that got the minimum that are like farly they deserve way more. Like there's a pretty
Eric Gordon got a minimum, and like he's obviously not what he once was, but he's definitely more than a minimum guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of good guards. Yeah. I mean, the guard market was oversaturated. Like Malik Beasley, Dennis Smith Jr., Lonnie Walker, just to name a few. Like there's way more guys that got the minimum that deserve way more. It's in the end, like I think those guys got squeezed mainly because of these contracts that already existed, and now like the new system just kind of came in, and it still threw some teams off whack. So hopefully, teams do start to negotiate more. There's less no-brainer max contracts, and in the end, that theoretically would help. I think that's ultimately. It's like one of the bigger factors to what will help the middle class. If we see more negotiation on the highest ends, that would help the players in the middle.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing is if you do get those negotiations at the high end, like it's going to take something, but you could see a scenario where a guy is like you mentioned Zach LaVine, right? And you could see a guy like Zach LaVine, let's say he hits the market at the same time as, I don't know, who's like a solid two guard that isn't an all-star or something, right?
Like Tyler Hero?
Yeah, let's say Tyler Hero. And let's say Zach LaVine is sitting there with, the Bulls, and he's like, look, I need the max. You got to give me the max. If Hero's sitting there at the same time and he's like, look, you give me $30 million a year, I'm there. And it might create actually one, I think it's going to eventually restore value to the unrestricted free agent market because of this, because I think teams will be more willing to negotiate and not just try and not be so scared of like, well, if we don't give him the money and he hits the market, like, oh my God, what could happen? I think they'll be more willing to play that game. And then the other side of this, which I don't know if this is a good or bad thing for you, but like, in baseball, you see this all the time where, I mean, it's the one sport, which is, it's also bizarre, but like the top free agents with the market, and they'll sit there for like, until fucking training camps like pretty much done, and then finally they'll sign. But I think you could see scenarios where a guy is like, negotiating for a max, and that's just not going to happen instantly because teams are trying to negotiate the price down. And I wonder if you can see like some of these, we're so used to this like you mentioned, like this bombardment of deals as soon as free agency opens. I wonder if now you'll see a little bit more time and restraint given because teams maybe aren't as like willing to just, well, look, let's just give him the money now, because this is the other part of it too. I think teams got very accustomed to, look, let's, and players and agents got accustomed to this too, right? Where it's like, look, let's just take the money now, let's or we can give them the money now from the team's perspective, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out later. We'll figure out, but like, and maybe you can elaborate on this, but I think with the introduction of these, the first and the second apron and the restrictions they introduce and how you're able to trade, this seems to me like the strategy of sign guys and figure it out later, regardless of what it does to your immediate cap situation, is not as viable as it was under the previous CBA agreement.
I want to believe that teams are going to start feeling that way, but as long as the cap keeps going up, I think that most of these contracts will still be tradable. Maybe the value will go down, but you're still going to have a team that wants these players. Again, we're kind of Zach LaVine seems to be like the prime example today. But
You're on a Knicks podcast, so don't
yeah,
worry. We had a
yeah.
lot of Zach LaVine conversations on here.
But that's just a guy like I wouldn't give up really like much for him. But if I'm a team that could use him, and even if my cap situation isn't the cleanest, but like it could kind of work, and I have to give up too much, like okay, like it's definitely worth the conversation. I'd still consider it. So in the end, there's always going to be a team that wants these guys as long as they're still producing, and the cap keeps going up. I think at some point, I don't know when, we will start to see diminishing returns, or the cap eventually kind of plateauing. And if we're, I don't know how close we are to that, but if it ever comes, that's kind of when that's kind of when the party stops, and the what you sign a player to really matters, because everyone is signing players to contracts with the idea in mind that the cap's still supposed to go up. It's now the cap can't go up more than 10%. And it seems like it's for most of the next few years, it's still going to go up 10% at least. So, yeah, as long as the cap goes up, like it just doesn't matter. Like at some point, the percentage of that player's salary is going to be low enough where you can make something happen. And I don't think we're close to that plateau anytime soon. The just sign now, worry about it later. Just it's probably still going to happen. I think where we're going to see more patience, more like longer quote unquote holdouts, I guess, is with extensions and trades. We're kind of seeing it right now with the Dame and Harden stuff. Like that's taken a while, and we'll see. There's some, I think, because in the end now, yeah, free agency, it's not what it was. Cap space isn't being used to sign players, honestly, like you're supposed to. More than half the cap space this year was used to acquire players under contract or renegotiate existing players. So I think if the money is being made on extensions and trades, then in those areas we could start to see more patience, heavier negotiations. I think this free agency like blow up all like just how it gets done all at once. It doesn't seem like that's going to go away anytime soon.
Well, so what I was wondering with the second apron thing, and I think the aprons they're confusing to a lot of people. I feel less confused than others, but I still feel somewhat confused. So with the second apron, is it like if you're over the second apron, when you trade a player out, you can't aggregate salaries out, but can you aggregate salaries coming in? And you can't take in more than like what you're sending out, correct? If you're over the second apron.
So it's also for is it for okay, yeah. If you're over the second apron, you can't trade multiple players' salaries to combine to add them together. that's what aggregation. That's what aggregation really means. Like I haven't gone through the CBA to know if it means they cannot trade two players in general, because you could trade multiple players but not aggregate them. But just in terms of aggregating the salaries and combining them to get that bigger salary, yeah. If the trade puts you over the second apron at the end, if you're over it at the end of the trade, yeah, that's not allowed. But the reverse is allowed. Like the CBA, the second apron rules are kind of motivating teams that are big spenders to deconsolidate, to trade their most expensive guys for multiple role players. And I don't think we've really seen that happen yet. I don't think we've seen like the Clippers or the Warriors trade any of their highest paid players for multiple. We saw Jordan Poole get traded for Chris Paul, but that's kind of like
that was a different
salary trade.
That was like a long-term salary dump for Golden State.
Yeah, I think there was when DeAndre Ayton was available, that was one where it seemed like, okay, they're probably going to trade him for 2 or 3 guys and just fill out the depth, because
and actually
no matter what.
Yeah, and we've actually kind of we're seeing the opposite with the Clippers, where they seem like they want to get Harden. So like obviously they would need to aggregate side for that. But it's like that's one thing they can do that right now, because the second apron doesn't kick in until after this upcoming season, right? Like those stringent restrictions. But that's where I'm curious about like what those teams do, because Boston is another example of this, right? They've kind of just been like, once they made the Porzingis trade, it was pretty obvious they were just like, we're just going to go over the second apron and like we'll figure that out whenever we need to figure that out. But I'm curious about that because I'm looking at their roster and you look at their rotation and it's like, okay, they basically have 7 guys, right? They've got Tatum, they've got Brown, they've got Porzingis, Horford, who's about 7,000 years old, Robert Williams, Brogdon, and Derek White. And then it's like, okay, you've got like Peyton Pritchard and, some other guys they've drafted, these fringier guys. But it's a situation where I'm like, in a year from, I wonder if that was part of their thinking with Jaylen Brown, where it's like, we don't necessarily love this contract. We got to give it. And in a year from now, if we need to trade him to build out our depth again, we'll have that opportunity. But what you're saying is if they decided that, they can't aggregate salaries to go after another guy, like to get one player in or even 2 players in, but they can trade Jaylen Brown himself for like 3 guys, as long as it brings them to a lower salary than what they're sending out. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. You can't also increase payroll in a trade. You got to take in no more than you're giving out. A lot of trade restrictions, basically, like sign and trade they basically can't really do sign and trades, like signing and trading their own free agent out. Can't send out cash. Right now, all it is they can't, for this year, just no mid-level exception, no buyout players for players making over the mid-level.
Right.
I think it's something else. But yeah, everything else really starts to kick in next year. And so because of that, you got the Warriors, you got the Clippers, you got the Suns. It really doesn't matter this year because even the draft penalties, that stuff doesn't kick in till next season. So everyone's pretty no one really cares this year but we'll see what happens next year. But already next year seems like there's a lot of the same teams are gonna be over it. I think like the Clippers. I mean, not the Clippers. The Clippers. Okay, assuming they keep Kawhi and George, they'll probably stay over it. The Warriors could actually. There's a window where they stay below it after they presumably cut Chris Paul. We'll see. But they
because Clay comes off the books, right? And so does Chris Paul. But like, I mean, if they want to bring them back, who knows what their salaries are? But yeah.
Yeah, like if they cut Chris Paul and then bring back Klay Thompson at something a little less than what Chris Paul is going to make, they'll probably be below the second apron. But then you got like the Celtics; they're going to be over it for sure. The Grizzlies, they're right now set to be over it after giving Bane that deal. They're paying Ja, Bane, Jaren and Smart a lot of money, they seem ready to spend. And when I first read about the second apron, my first thought is like, okay, like who would want to go over this? It honestly doesn't. It's not worth it. It seems like,
Yeah.
especially when it like affects you in the draft in the future. It just seems like a nightmare. But if you're not willing to go over it a little bit, then you're kind of falling victim to the what I like to call having too many good players problem. And I think that's something that the Grizzlies, they've kind of are in that issue where they almost like last season, this past season, once Adams got out and they needed to add another big guy, no Clark, no Adams, they had to cut Kennedy Chandler,
Yep.
and so they could make room for Kenneth Lofton. And they still have all their draft picks going forward. They could have some guys that break out this year. Do they get paid? The Pelicans are another team like that where they already are paying some of their best guys a lot of money, and they still got it. And then they got Trey Murphy on the way, Jose Alvarado. We'll see what happens with Dyson Daniels. Like those are teams that they draft so well. They're gonna have, and they're probably gonna run into a problem of do you pay everybody? But if
The
you have all
Pelicans have
these really good,
Yeah, I was just gonna say their situation's so weird too because it's like they have no idea what the hell Zion and Ingram even look like together because they just have never played basically. And you're right, they've got all these contractual situations that are on the horizon. I mean, I follow a few Pelicans guys on Twitter, and they're like, a few. They've both just they're like, look, like this was probably a summer they needed to do something to like consolidate and but like I mean like nothing happened this summer that you could look at and be like, well, why didn't they do that? Um, but yeah, I think you're right. Like they're definitely a team where it's like kind of sneaking up on them, and I think Ingram is actually extension eligible this summer. He can sign like a 3-year, $145 million extension to his existing contract. But then again, like he could also be in a situation where he's like, look, like if I can just stay healthy, I've got a shot at making All NBA. Then I become super max eligible, and that's a shit ton of money. So, yeah, like I think you're absolutely right that there are these teams that have been keeping their powder dry in a way, and it's like having powder dry is great. That's a wonderful thing, but it also eventually is going to force you into making tough decisions. And like the Knicks are another team where I think I think we'll get a Josh Hart extension here pretty soon. We will. I think we're probably going to get an Emmanuel quickly extension this summer. That won't kick in until obviously the following summer. But like by next summer, I mean the cap jumping will probably just about save them and still keep them under the first apron. But like you're playing now very much on the fringes, and I think it's going to force a lot of these teams that have been patient and waiting for the right guy, waiting for the right guy, waiting for the right guy, where it's like in the next year, 2 years, a few of these teams are going to have to make some tough calls. And that can come in the form of, basically cutting talent in terms of, not necessarily getting the value you want for them or, consolidation. And maybe you even have to overpay just because you'll be competing with these other teams that are like, no, we need to consolidate. we need to consolidate.
yeah. So like a team like the Grizzlies or the Pelicans,
Mhm.
I'll just stick with the Grizzlies for now because they are pretty much set to go over the second apron. They did everything they needed to do to get into that position and sustain it because once you're over the second apron, you can't really do much in terms of trades to get better. You don't have any exceptions, so you can't really sign anyone good in free agency. So your best way to improve the team is through the draft. So you already got all these good young guys that need to get paid. As long as you're willing to pay them, great. But then you're kind of set with this team. But thankfully, the Grizzlies still have all their draft picks going forward. Yeah, maybe they want to try to do a consolidation trade now, get like a really good three, like OG, someone like him. But if that doesn't happen, they still have all their picks to help sustain, the draft. Maybe do trade those guys later if needed for the pieces you need. The Pelicans, they have like a crazy surplus. So if they're willing to spend, they can spend a lot of money, be over the second apron, and they can trade picks to make upgrades later and still have some left over to keep their roster spots afloat. Um, So yeah, I just think that if I think that's the best way. I think a team like Utah, OKC, also like if they are willing to spend, they're in a great position too. So I I just think that as of now, it seems kind of encouraging that I think we do have maybe more teams than I anticipated willing to go over it. Like if you have 5 teams willing to go over it, I think that's like a pretty I think that's like a pretty generous number per year.
Yeah.